Yeah, 2 seconds. I'll probably welcome everyone. This is recording, but yeah, I'll just put it off hands-free. I'm in a cafe in someplace in Ecuador. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, I'm on a
cool,
couch somewhere in
excellent.
England. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds very subversive, doesn't it? Very dubious. Locked in some basement in God knows where, which might actually happen to us at some point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, if we carry on talking the way we do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very plausible. So, what's the topic of conversation today? What should we open up with?
Well, we can start with the obvious, the
Oh
conflict,
yeah,
the staged conflict, the ramifications, the repercussions, the reasons, the yeah, um, all of that stuff, and yeah, there are many angles, as we know. It's always like a multiple pronged attack, um, and obviously it's completely scripted. Things of this magnitude never happen by chance. It's never organic. At least 99.9% of the time, anyway. Like occasionally you might get, I don't know, some random rebels doing things, but yeah, 99% of the time, anything that's called a war or a terrorist attack is planned way in advance and funded by elites. And yeah, this is part of their playbook. And as we spoke about earlier on, in regards to me saying like, it's all scripted, my view on it is that they're kind of maybe playing out like the book of, Revelation or something. Like, they're doing that.
hmm
It's like, like the final holy war, like you got like the Muslims versus Jews and, basically Bible versus Quran. And there's always the talk in both of the books, the New Testament and in the Quran, they talk about a holy war taking place in, the final days. And yes, I think that could be just one thing that they're kind of playing out before, yeah, I don't know, the final countdown to 2030 or 33 or 26, whenever it is. But I think we're heading towards some kind of pinnacle of fuckery. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've just covered it. We can
Yeah.
end this. And no, I mean 100%. And I met an older gentleman in a cafe the other day. Got talking to him. Turns out this guy is retiring here, and very intelligent. Obviously not jabbed. Very knowledgeable about all of these kinds of topics. And one thing that he mentioned that I haven't cross-checked yet, but he said that it's something like 1,000 years. Now, what calendar that is, who knows? Whether it's Gregorian or Judaic or what is the other calendar that's used? Is it, I always get them mixed up. Anyway, so he said that it's nearing 1,000 years from Jesus's birth or sacrifice or whatever it was until the kind of end game, which for sure has played out in the Revelations, absolutely. Um, so it's going to be
Or would it
2026.
be
This is
2000 since his death? Do you think that's what it was? He died at
something
33,
like
allegedly.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's 2000, but again, I don't know what calendar is being used because I know that the Jewish calendar is really different to the ones that we pursue. It's probably something I should know, but I have a lazy mind in many respects. But yeah, he said 2026 is the expected downturn. So because it has to be contrasted as a down and an up, just like with every peak and elevation, there's thereafter a decline, just like the financial markets. So he said that there's going to be different stages from 2026 to 2033, the latter being the end, essentially. Whatever that end is, who knows? Essentially, probably a transhuman transition, which is, of course, the game plan under the guise of safety and all the kind of nonsense that was put forth under the demo that was the COVID pandemic. The kind of game of which was to essentially discipline society to pursue a digital formula whereby kind of the digitalization doesn't end with, say, payment systems and identification, but actually is intertwined with one's own biological aesthetic. So we become one with tech. and that way we're controlled to a great degree. People don't even realize that standard Wi-Fi routers in your house have the technological capacity to monitor your heart rate, monitor your brain waves, which is, I think, what we discussed in the last podcast very briefly about the kind of neurological capabilities that the kind of status quo have, to monitor and manipulate our thought patterns and processes. So yeah, I think, linking that into the kind of Israeli-Gaza conflict, can we call it that? I don't even want to kind of differentiate between the two, because of course Hamas is just a derivative of the exact same cabal. The idea that Hamas, the idea that the Israelis,
ISIS, all the same.
yeah, exactly. ISIS, of course, named for occultist purposes, and likewise every other kind of terrorist organization is just a subsidiary, objectively, of the state. It's open public knowledge that the Taliban was funded and created by the United States in the 1980s, although it doesn't go deep into as to why that was, and the idea proclaiming that there was this kind of Russian US kind of oppositionary stance fighting over the territories of Afghanistan, which of course is not the case. Just like with Gaza, just like with Israel, just like with Russia and Ukraine, there is no opposition. It's just a game to divide society and to pursue their death rituals. The sacrificial element of war is perhaps more important than anything else for them. Of course, the time frame in the numerology links in, but the death and blood, the spilling of blood for them is a prime factor, which again links into what we were talking about last week with respect to human trafficking and how children are utilized not necessarily wholly for sex trafficking and not necessarily for organ harvesting, but for the consumption of the chemical elements within the blood, which is of course known as adrenochrome. So yeah, where should we go from there? What's your stance on that, James?
Absolutely agree with everything. But I was thinking today, let's go on a point that we maybe don't agree on, and that was the kind of mass exodus stroke migration angle, which is possible, but I don't think now, just no one would have it now. They just wouldn't have it now. Especially in Britain, maybe some of these Scandinavian countries might, but even they've had enough. So I just can't see it. But anyway, if you want to lay out lay out the blueprint of what you think.
Right.
Yeah.
So the blueprint is, I was pondering earlier, and it kind of occurred to me what I feel is going to be happening with the so-called Gaza-Israeli conflict. As we know, there's been a mass migration, an exodus, intentional one, of persons from not even conflict zones, but conflicts have always been utilized as the excuse for allowing 20 to 30-year-old men who represent over 90% of this migratory pattern into not just Europe, but more developed countries, primarily, well, actually, I would take that back, primarily Caucasian developed countries, because as has been pointed out numerous times, the Japanese accept no one, the Koreans accept no one, most Arab countries from the UAE to Qatar to Bahrain to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia accept nobody, even though more than often they're in the periphery of where said conflicts are happening. It's all directed at European nations, so North America, Canada, United States, and Europe. And there's been a mass exodus for a very, very long time under the guise that they're refugees, which they absolutely are not. And this is to create the same divisionary patterns which the First and Second World War were utilized for, where 60-odd million, and that's the magic number, of course, whether that's accurate or not, many millions of people died in Russia alone. 60 million is I believe, the data set for the Second World War. And then we've got the Holodomor massacre, my apologies, in the Ukraine, which preceded that Second World War. And of course, the First World War, and we know, although we won't discuss it right now, the origins of why those conflicts happen with respect to the founding of Israel, of course, thereafter. And this links in my opinion. I think everything is mockery and everything is replicated, as we know. And Israel was founded on the migration of Jews from Europe under the auspice or guise of war. The data sets for that are, of course, falsified. But they're going to replicate that now, and they're going to use this conflict as an excuse to migrate Gazans and Palestinians en masse to Europe, as they've been doing with so-called Afghan refugees, Iraqi refugees, people from North African conflict zones and from all over the world, and with respect to the United States, from South America. And they're going to use this, as they have been buttering up the liberals or self-proclaimed liberals for a very, very long time, You always see little Palestinian flags in universities, stuck to billboards in hostels and backpacker areas. The youth of today, who are essentially the Nazi youth or the Hitler youth, for lack of a better term, the new lib fascists, the puppets of the state. They use them for climate change protests. They use them for this, that, and the next. Now it's Gaza, and that is going to be the final push. Now, with respect to what you were saying about why would they do that when people have had enough? You're absolutely right. People have had enough, and that's exactly what they want. That's exactly what they want with the United States. They are pushing conflict, not just direct conflict with the Ukraine and Russia, not just with Gaza and Palestine. They're pushing utter civil war on a global level in every region of the world. And I'm sure if we had the knowledge base to discuss kind of more, I guess, smaller areas of the world that get less attention, perhaps in Central Africa or South Asia. I'm sure there are all kinds of conflicts like the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, the fights between the Buddhists and the Muslims there.
Absolutely.
It's although we get the focus because we're in the West, this is a plan that is being applied to every corner of the world. And when they spark it off, just like with the COVID pandemic, everyone gets affected.
So what I would say in response to that is most of the nation's leaders, or puppets, shall we say, all have a very clear anti-immigration policy. I mean, that's kind of what they're pushing. It's like, yeah, we're getting strong on immigration, on illegal immigration. And I think what you said in regards to, this being used to divide, I think that is like the primary kind of, I think just by virtue of this happening, it will unstabilize every multicultural place. Like, for instance, in the UK, you've already had lots of rallies with Muslim people going out, saying, "Oh yeah, what's going on in Palestine is disgusting," and then you've got Israelis, and obviously there's lots of people that there's lots of Jewish like places like Dalston in London and Hampstead and all of these like areas that the Jews frequent, and also lots of Muslims live in these areas, and you're probably going to get attacks on mosques and and the place where not mosques. What's the name of the place where Jewish people worship?
Synagogues.
Synagogues, yeah. So you're probably going to get synagogues being attacked for sure. There'll probably be more synagogues than the mosques attacked, because that's just like the nature of the beast. And then there's going to be like so all over Europe, you've got lots of Christians or people that are going to be pro-Israel. The Western media are pro-Israel. It was advertised as, oh, look at Hamas did like an attack on Israel, which they did, and they did kill innocent people. But obviously, that had been going on for a long time before that. And even even the Palestinians, were implants originally on the land where they are, if you go back far enough. But in this current phase, post the United Nations, it's it's clearly been, like you said, Israel is like a state created by the West. Ultimately, it's the intelligence base of the world, and they are the head of the snake. They're the head of the operation.
Oh, 100%. Well said. Absolutely.
And once again, I started off by talking about how this kind of links in with the biblical script. The Jews are literally the chosen ones in the Bible. So I mean, I'd assume that that's their book. That
and then we've got recently the World Cup with Messi proclaimed as the Messiah, of course, at a very pivotal point in history. More numerology, no doubt, sprinkled everywhere else that we could bring up.
And it was the 2022 World Cup, wasn't it? So 222 6. So these things, almost never. It was a France Argentina final. I think it was France Argentina, wasn't it, in the final? So
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm not sure if there's any symbology in that, but France is a six-letter word that begins with F, which is also the sixth letter in the alphabet. So
That's also true. I didn't know that before. I hadn't heard that. That's a very good point.
Yeah, so there's I'm sure there's other tidbits in there. NCE equals 22, R is 18. So yeah, I mean, who
Well,
knows?
returning to your point, though, I would say, I would disagree, I guess, which is how we brought the conversation into the podcast, because I feel that actually one of the factors, which I guess I haven't disclosed yet, is that for the mass migration, is that a lot of this migration, in fact, the vast majority of it, has been from Muslim countries. Europe is being, Islamicized, I guess one could say, to the point where Cologne has Europe's largest mosque intentionally placed adjacent to one of Europe's largest cathedrals, and it's in a far better condition. Because what's the purpose of inciting warfare unless the division you've already supplanted within said society is there for the kind of rupture? If there is no Islamic proportion there to oppose Western ideals, then the war doesn't have any effect on Europe. For that effect to take place, they had to import opposing perspectives to allow for this kind of thing to bubble away and erode away at said societies. And now, of course, there's sizable tracts of Muslims in and around Europe. Germany is full to the brim, let's say, and Frankfurt is now, as I think I spoke of before, less than 50% German-born natives, many of whom are Turkish. In fact, Germany has one of the largest, if not the largest, Turkish populations outside of Turkey. And these people are Muslim, and the UK has, of course, huge networks of Pakistanis and Indians as a consequence of the colonial links with those regions. And all of these imports are intentional because, like you say, it absolutely is at the kind of boiling point, not putting words into your mouth there, but with the protests and the opposition by, let's say, Muslims to the lib-fash ideals of promoting LGBT and all that kind of nonsense. It's all intentional, and this is going to rupture, explode, and there's going to be civil war everywhere, just like in the United States with BLM and African-American communities, fighting against Latinos and fighting against Caucasians, the Caucasians fighting against Latinos and fighting against African-Americans and all the other different ethnic groups in that struggle as well. They even brought in the Asians. Remember, Stop Asian Hate, another thing that they're trying to spark off just to have even more conflict. They have every angle covered, and the aim is, of course, civil war on a global level, the biggest bloodshed we've ever seen, or at least in the knowledge base planted to us within the historical narrative supplied by them. It will be the biggest conflict of all time. And returning, as I spoke to you earlier on the phone, about to this lady who's a kind of spiritualist in Bulgaria. She has a channel called New Earth on YouTube. She was talking about how these so-called prophecies, a prophecy for me, as I think we agree on, is not in any way spiritual kind of magic based, but is more a logical prediction, often deriving from those complicit in the said scenario, Freemasons or whatever, that leak the information for the purpose of mockery or to create a kind of controlled oppositionary network. And yeah, I think we're going to see this, to cut it short, I guess, just bloodshed to conclude, absolute bloodshed. But there has to be 3 world wars in the prophecy. And I think that's also been referred to by people that you brought up in the podcast, episode 2 or 3, I believe. The British author, I can't quite remember his name. You asked me if I thought he was a shill. But a lot of our authors, I think of War of the Worlds, have perhaps not exactly that, but there's always been that kind of... they've always been alluding to said kind of prophecies. So I think 3 is the magic number. 3 conflicts is what we're going to see. The first and the second have already happened. Third is going to be in our lifetime, and we're going to witness an implosion of humanity.
Yeah.
Over a coffee and a biscuit, mind you.
I'm inclined to agree. And people will just be like swiping while it's happening. People have their phones out, recording it. Uploaded on Facebook.
Recording the zombies as they charge through the gates. Yeah, that may also happen.
Literally. So I mean, once again, it's like, I'd say that we agree. I don't think that there's any need for extra migrants to be brought in. I think there's enough here, and I think this is just like the torch paper. This is just to light the torch paper. And
Yeah,
like
that
you
could
said,
well be the case as well. That could well be the case.
But as I said, let's see. It just seems like now for them to have like a open drive, like no doubt some will flee, some will make it here illegally. Absolutely, always been the case. Europe, has lots of open borders. But in terms of having like a actual legal drive to help them, yeah, it's like they've made their stance clear on on who their allies are, on who in fact, like obviously we know that essentially there's a certain group of people that are behind everything, but officially, and to those in the know, when we say officially, we mean like scripted in a sense of what the status quo do, what they want us to believe is true. So the official script is obviously that we're allies of Israel, and indirectly we fund the attacks on Hamas or Palestine. Yeah, so for them to essentially bring in kind of like a somewhat of like a political enemy by proxy, I don't think they'll do it. Although I can understand why you would think they might based on history, but I think that same history is the reason why they won't do it. But yeah, I think in the next 6 months or so, we'll see.
Where we will see the start, absolutely, in that magic number 6. There is one more angle that was brought up by New Earth, which is quite scary in that it does replicate the past quite perfectly. Now, the so-called prophecies quoted, paraphrased by said lady in her channel, New Earth, which I recommend anyone to check out, state that essentially what's going to happen is there's going to be a fuse lit in this conflict, because essentially otherwise it's a stagnant theater between Ukraine and Russia. Now, Georgia and the Caucasus traditionally, as always, are going to light that spark. Georgia is going to be the sacrificial lamb, just like in the 2008 invasion of Ossetia, whilst the Beijing Olympics was happening. Georgia invaded one of the most powerful countries in the world, Russia, and of course was completely bombed to shit as a consequence of that, because there was no chance of having any success. Naturally, they in fact murdered over 50 Russian peacekeepers in Ossetia to spark it off, executed them up against the wall, supported by Ukraine in the West atypically. Now they're going to spark it off and they're going to be destroyed. Now, then in the prophecies, Turkey, which has traditionally always been that center of the divide between East and West, right in that kind of Asiatic peninsula, it's on the cusp of both worlds, so to speak. And that's also where Boris Johnson's grandfather came from, and also where many sects of satanic Judaism were created and concocted. And of course, how the Israelites ended up in Russia, in places like Kazan, controlling and creating the Ashkenazi branch of Judaism. Remember Ashkenazi, N-A-Z-I, Nazi, very, very coincidental, given that most of them ended up migrating to Germany. Now, apparently, the protocols of this of Zion, perhaps. No, the protocols of this prophecy dictate that the exact same thing is going to happen again. Turkey, which also during the Cuban Missile Crisis was the main branch, they were the origin of that crisis. Again, it's all fiction, but supposedly Castro planted nuclear weapons within range of the United States in Cuba because the United States had implanted nuclear weapons in Turkey with range across the USSR. Now, even before that, going back to the Charge of the Light Brigade, the famous movie, the Crimean War, it was all fought over Turkey. And of course, as I said, the former British Prime Minister and aristocrat, so a bloodline to the satanic cabal, he's related, as many Jewish people are, to the Turks. Now, the Turks will get involved in this conflict as a consequence of the implosion of Georgia. The US will plant their airstrike defense systems there and whatnot. And as a result of Turkey's influence, Russia will be completely destroyed, and the Turkish Islamic Empire will continue right up into the gates of Moscow, just like it did before with the going back to the Jewish tribes and their movement far north. And the Ottoman Empire, of course, will be reenacted, which is what they've been planning for a long time. Turkey has been gaining monumental influence globally. And for those of our audience that have an interest in this subject particularly, I used to live in Central Asia for a couple of years in Kyrgyzstan, and every single mosque, every single university, every single building of any caliber, aesthetically speaking, has a plaque which says funded by the Turkish government. That's in Turkmenistan, in Kyrgyzstan, in Uzbekistan, in Tajikistan, in all of these countries. Turkey has a huge influence, and they've even created a fiction that all of these people actually derive from Turkish biology, which of course is all just propaganda nonsense. Maybe it has a thin line of truth to it, but naturally they expand it and create this kind of fictitious narrative to sponsor this cohesion between the Turks, not just to the east in Central Asia, but now we're seeing Turkish influence move into the West, aligning to that immigration of Turkish people and Muslims into the European empire as a whole. And of course, the EU and Europe has become an empire. So I think that's what we're going to see, the complete eradication of European culture, of Caucasian culture in Europe at least, and the replacement with the Islamic world, because that's the age that they're pursuing. And I think, as we've discussed before, every empire, every region, every world has had its dominance at one point. Africa probably the furthest back, as there are the fewest, I guess, remnants of their last, let's say, victory and era. Chinese also were a long time ago, but the Chinese are up and coming once again. Everyone gets to their chance, everyone gets to the top of the peak, and then they descend into cataclysm. And I think we're going to see the age of the Arabs very, very soon, especially with the prominence of Middle Eastern countries. You know, the constructions that we're hearing of in places like Saudi Arabia with these crazy modern cities like Neom and the Line. I think whoever gets it first, who knows? Maybe it's going to be the Chinese, maybe it's going to be the Arabs. But certainly, I think there is an aim to completely eradicate Europe and return it to the Dark Ages and replace it with the settlement of Islamic-sponsored individuals.
Just absolutely, I can see that. The Ottoman Empire was at its peak in 1566, of course, which is 666. Yeah, 15. Yep. Yeah. And it ended in 1914, which was the start of World War One, as we know. So, yeah, interesting timing, as always. Yeah, I think we've hopefully shed some,
provided some people with some food for thought. Our 3 audience members, or perhaps are on 12 or 20 now. Hopefully we've given people something to ponder.
And now I'm gonna eat some food and try and do something semi-productive for the rest of the evening. What about yourself?
I'm gonna basically just continue doing some admin, same as you. I think everything's sorted. I think everything is about productivity now, especially with all these kind of current interests, and getting my phone robbed and getting my wallet robbed and all that kind of stuff has just meant that I've got a backlog of little annoying, irritating things to do, like uploading, downloading, sorting Google Drive folders, etc. But I'm sure it's not going to be as interesting as what you're cooking, because it's usually very healthy. So what is on the dish, on the plate today, James? What's the dish of the day? Salmon?
No, it's probably like something like, I'm thinking about something vegetarian. I've got like some chickpeas and some black beans. I might just like hash something together out of that and maybe have it with some, like, I don't know, bulgur wheat or something. So it'll be like, I don't know, let's just say like a bean stew. And I'll have that with some kind of complex carb. Yeah, I think that'll be it. I've ate quite a lot of meat this weekend, so yeah, I think I'll probably go for something veggie. Yeah, and that's what I'll be concocting this evening. And yeah, the usual, admin, like you said,
Gonna go to the gym,
doing a bit of matching. I'll go to the gym in the morning. I think I might actually wake up early and go before work. Yeah, and that'll
Well,
be the plan.
sounds healthy, sounds productive, and yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up. Otherwise, our audience members are 3 or 4, or perhaps less of them now, will be getting bored of hearing about black beans and gyms.
Exactly.
And my Google Drive nonsense. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, we hope you tune in and subscribe, and perhaps someone will be our 7th subscriber. So lucky us, and yeah. I guess, when do you think we have another one done by, James? Like a week or 8 days, something like that?
Yes, yeah, something like that. So our frequency, 7 to 10 days. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, adios, and I'll catch up with you probably later or this
Yeah.
weekend. Bye.
Ciao.